So the Twitter files scandal that's erupting right now is actually a good reminder to us all about the growing importance of censorship and the lack of free speech and what that means to the modern media hive mind. So I'm kind of personally entertained right now by both the meltdown and the changes that Elon Musk is bringing to Twitter. So I've had a Twitter account for some time now, but I kind of lost interest as the censorship and the shadow banning and the related viewpoint discrimination made it far less interesting for me to use. However, I'm starting to use Twitter again. You can actually see me at We the Governed. So follow me if you're interested. And don't forget to subscribe, share this channel, or make sure you like down below. And just remember to subscribe to my website as well. And you can also leave a comment, and I often respond to your comments. I'm interested what it'll be like using Twitter again, but speaking of Twitter, I'm actually involved in an active lawsuit against Twitter right now. I'm typically in so many litigations all at once that I can hardly keep track of them. Sometimes I forget how many I'm in. But I believe at this exact point in time, that's the only lawsuit I'm in. And I'm sure I'll increase the number of lawsuits either because somebody will sue me because they're mad, or maybe I'll file a few as well. But at this point in time, it's all a distraction from what Elon Musk's Twitter files and the whole dump and what this has actually exposed for the whole world to see. So, of course, what we found is that, yes, there has been an active Twitter censorship program suppressing any ideas that don't perfectly conform to this media hive mind and their government elitist friends. Of course, this is mostly made up of the Borg left in our country. So most of us have known this for years because we've experienced it personally. But it's nice to see that more people are waking up to this obnoxious and obvious effort to silence all dissent and the control that the elite narrative and what they want to have. So obviously, if Twitter's opened the doors into kind of the ugly stuff that they've been doing behind the scenes with their friends, the Democratic National Committee, the FBI, the intelligence community, and the various bureaucracies that control them, it should be clear that they're not alone. Nobody should be under any illusions that Facebook or Google and others are not doing the exact same thing right now. In fact, it appears that the entire corporate media establishment, the New York Times, NBC, CNN, MSNBC, etc., all of them, they're just essentially just different faces of the same Borg, colluding to cover up the stories that they want to bury to protect their political friends, and then faking the stories that they want to hurt their political enemies. And this has been the story, and now it's really pretty much become uncovered. Now, that's not new. The concept of government colluding with the media has been around for a long time. Pravda was actually often mocked back in the Cold War as kind of the obvious mouthpiece of the government in the Soviet Russia days. And the 20th century has had many examples of the government controlling the narrative and the controlled media functioning as a simple and logical extension of the government. There's been a brief time in America where we mock that, but today it appears that we've fallen into this kind of same censorship trap that we've seen before. So I produced some videos about the history of censorship in America, and I've written about the importance of free speech before. I'll link to these videos and articles down below if you're interested. So it's an important topic to me. But this recent Twitter files dump on top of the other stories and scandals that have rocked the corporate media establishment in recent years should help you realize why a shrinking minority of Americans believe anything that the corporate media reports anymore. By most accounts, the surveys and the studies on the subject clearly indicate that over 60% of Americans, they don't trust the media at all. And the percentage of people who completely trust the media is a very shrinking small percentage. And nearly all of them are Democrats, with a few mainstream Republicans tossed in for good measure. And who can blame the people for this mistrust? I certainly don't. Because after all, the more you learn about the modern corporate media, the less you're going to be able to trust them. And the problem really only gets worse the more you realize that the group hive mind thinking that occurs at these corporate media institutions and the extreme lengths that they're going to take to silence you and all who can think for themselves. And this mess is only compounded when they link up with a political party and government establishment become nothing more than appendage of big government, which is pretty much all they've become. Now, there once was a time when the corporate media prided themselves on afflicting the comfortable and comforting the afflicted. That was kind of a famous quote. But those days are long, long gone. Today, our modern media pretty much exists to protect the powerful and attack those who dare question authority. And you don't have to believe me, just look around. You don't need to go national for those examples either. In my home state of Washington, all you have to do is pay attention to the Seattle Times or King 5 News, the Tacoma News Tribune, the Spokesman Review, and the majority of the other local corporate media to find examples of journalists who essentially make a career of protecting the powerful special interests in Washington state government. Remember how the Seattle Times buried the sexual molestation stories of the mayor of Seattle for almost a decade? He was a powerful Democrat, after all, and they actively decided to conceal the truth when they first found out about that story. And does anyone actually believe this is unusual behavior? The corporate media in our state is where whistleblower stories, they go to die. Concealed and buried, they bury them to protect the Inslee administration or the Democratic Party, whoever they have to protect at the time. So if you're going to report on corruption and government incompetence in Washington state, you'll need to report on bad behavior by elected Democrats. There's no choice. It's not a conspiracy. This is just what happens when one monolithic party has total control of the bureaucracy and everything around it as it exists in our state currently. So that doesn't mean they're not corrupt Republicans. I'm sure there are, but they don't have access to the taxpayer cash or the grant grifting operations where corruption is protected kind of behind this thin veneer of partisanship solidarity and this hive mind resistance to any independent thought. So just think about it. If you're a corrupt person, who are you going to work with? The people with access to the money and power, or the spineless ones cowering in the corner who don't have access to either? Even a Seattle Times reporter is capable of answering that question, but he probably won't because he's going to protect those who are in power. Of course, if you dare to question authority, you must be a racist, or maybe a Trumpster, or something evil, which is what King 5 News will call you every time you dare to question authority. Because nearly every major mainstream journalist right now believes this way. And they know if they actually report on any corrupt government behavior that's not been approved to report on, they're going to be out of a job. And if they dare to even question the insanity, they will be ostracized. When Eric Johnson from Como News produced the documentary Seattle is Dying and the follow-up Fight for the Soul of Seattle, he was attacked by the hive mind left. They do not want the truth out there. And Eric Johnson and his efforts to expose the truth has pitted the vast corporate media complex, the government, and the grant grifters who profit from particularly the homeless industrial complex. They were pitted now against him pretty much forever. Now, when Brandy Cruz, the former Seattle Fox News Q13 reporter, would occasionally even ask the most moderate of serious questions of Jay Inslee or the other Democratic politicians, she was undermined, she was attacked, and she eventually just broke away to go out on her own. So as the tiny number of real journalists willing to question authority and speak truth to power, this shrinks even further, the hive mind of the media complex, whatever's left, they're going to coalesce to protect the powerful special interests. And they're going to continue to become the extension of the government and the dominant political party. In this state, that's the Democrat Party. So the recent Twitter expose is just another example of this trend, but it is important. Now, I've never been a fan of Elon Musk. His tunnel project, I think, is just stupid and overhyped. I believe the entire Tesla electric car project was also hyped way beyond reality. And I greatly distrust his Neuralink gambit, for example. But I admit, I'm happy that he overpaid for Twitter and that he's ripped the cover off and gone public with this corruption. It's a good start from a very unlikely and completely unexpected place. But I still believe he overpaid $44 billion for the privilege. But it's not my money, and it's not my money that he wasted, so I appreciate this exposure, and I appreciate the fact that he's doing this. And it's also a reminder that suppression of free speech and the censorship that this demands, it's a critical threat to a free society. Our founding fathers actually knew this. They experienced the threat themselves, and they also experienced the liberating power of free speech and what it can do when it's unleashed. It's not accidental that this natural human right is officially recognized in the First Amendment to our Constitution, in the Bill of Rights. It's not the 17th, and it's not the last, it's the first. So our current political establishment and corporate media class also recognize the terrible threat that free speech actually represents to kind of their hive mind program. Don't be mistaken. The independent thought to these guys is a clear and present threat. Any willingness that you might have to question authority, that's also a threat. Speaking truth to power is a real threat to the powerful. And this is particularly true when the powerful is going to be dishonest and corrupt, and a willingness to expose the truth about their corruption and incompetence is a threat to them all. They realize that only they can keep up the grift as long as they can hide this truth from the public, and if you have free speech, you're a threat to that. So this is why it's far better for those of us who care about freedom and liberty to expose the truth about big government and to expose it widely. We must question authority. We must challenge them. And we have to do it without the corporate media's help. They're never going to help. They're part of the hive mind. They're not separate. And Twitter, this recent document dump clearly reminds us that that's true. What incentive does the corporate media have to report the truth? Zero, none. Now, in our state today, the dominant hive mind is part of the kind of lefty worldview, and it's greatly threatened by independent thought, free speech, and freedom. Just like any insular cult that can't stand outside scrutiny, most collectivist ideas are threatened by even the slightest idea of an alternative thought or an option that might exist out there. Orwell, who was a socialist himself, understood this very well when he wrote 1984, An Animal Farm. And if you've attended college in the last 30 years, like I have, you also have experienced this groupthink ideology on campus from the professors and the staff and the fellow indoctrinated students. It's an ugly thing to experience, and it's very real. They all want consensus, but that always means that you must conform to them, their beliefs, their political views, their agenda. Dissent is dangerous, and maybe it's even violent. Thought crime or deviation from the hive mind is an anathema, and it's a threat. Plus, it's probably racist, sexist, homophobic, and it's certainly transphobic. They keep coming up with all kinds of names to call you, just in an effort to intimidate and ostracize you, and they can't survive any other way. But the funny thing to me about this, by the way, is when I actually speak to younger folk and I ask them what freedom and liberty means to them, they sometimes repeat things like the freedom to listen to music or the freedom to dress in whatever they want, maybe to smoke pot, to abort babies, or other mostly very superficial things. And I kind of find this interesting in a way because it's a clever misdirection for the younger generation to be distracted by kind of trivial and temporary things while missing the true meaning of freedom. Modern bread and circuses approach to distracting a younger generation while their real freedom is eroded away. Of which, by the way, your clothing, music, and lifestyle, that can be included as a very minor part. But in the current culture, these superficial freedoms are not really threatened unless you live in North Korea, where they might execute you for watching the wrong movies, or Iran or Afghanistan, where they may kill you for not wearing a head covering, or maybe at the Evergreen State College, where you're certainly not allowed to think differently. But it is important for us to endlessly explain and to show the next generation that freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom to own firearms and defend yourself, freedom from unlawful surveillance, freedom from unlawful search and seizure, or the freedom to actually own your own property without the government taking it away from you, the freedom to control your own financial destiny. These are actually freedoms that are far more important than what they're currently being indoctrinated to believe for the younger generation. But what does this mean to you and I? I mean, we're just bit players involved in our families and our community. But what can we actually do about it? Well, we have to start speaking with our friends and family and neighbors. And I know I've said this a lot before, but everything starts locally. And it is locally where you can actually have the biggest impact. You start with topics of common interest to you and your family and your friends and your neighbors. Public safety, maybe local education, the failure of your planning departments, because they pretty much all fail, or the diverted funds in your roads department, or just something that's local, that matters to you and your community. And when we do this, even on a very small scale, it can begin to grow, because this is what becomes the free speech crack in the dam of censorship that the corporate media and their government friends have tried to enforce and build up for so long now. Maybe you can organize a local newsletter or a website where local neighbors can share what they know about public safety in your community. And if you do it well, your following are certainly going to grow. You might even start tweeting about it. And some of you will discover that you're good at this, and you'll network with others who share the same passion. And when your local paper or your news channel continues to do what they're told and they ignore the crime or the government abuse or the homeless drug addiction or other problems in your community, you'll have developed a following. And you'll be able to replace them, your local media, even if only in your local community. This is a start, and everything must start somewhere. Hyperlocal maybe, but it will be yours. Freedom and liberty are actually tough to extinguish entirely from the human soul. And this is particularly true when so many people begin to recognize how important these things are to how they want to live their lives. We live in exciting times. Sure, our government's run by clowns and idiots. Our media is apparently just as corrupt now as our government, and oftentimes they work hand in glove with them. So, however, it seems like most people, I believe, around us are waking up to this fact. Changing the politicians and the political class appears to be not a leading indicator of that. So I suspect that change comes later. However, change is coming no matter how much the hive mind may want to resist it. So let's start the resistance locally where you live. Maybe, surprisingly to me, we might even be able to tweet about it once again.